India is not it's not lacking in terms of the human capital. There have always been spots of brilliance, and when you point out, when you talk about the 1970s or the 60s, there have been scientists in India who've done a lot of wonderful stuff, a lot of great work, but it's been spotty.
So if you just think back to Oppenheimer, that was in a way the transition point for research in the US.
Taking a step back and seeing what is the problem with our research as of now. So there's not one, there's not two, there are plentiful, right? And which is why we are where we are.
There is always a great scientist like Albert Einstein who couldn't care a damn about commercializing anything that he was talking about, or like Edison, who was only thinking about commercializing all of what he was doing.
We have more than 1,000 universities in India, 40,000 colleges. This is the brief that came to me from ISB, by the way. 40,000 colleges, 1 million educators, and 40 million students passing out. And yet, there is this dearth of talent. I begin this session by asking my co-panelist here to tell me that despite the potential that we have for research, despite the fact that probably a few decades ago, we were far ahead than our neighbor, what happened? Where did we get lost along the way?
So in terms of numbers, we've risen quite rapidly in terms of the number of publications we have in the scientific journals. But there are some indicators of quality, citations being one of them, but there are other indicators of quality, and we've been relatively stagnant when it comes to quality on those indicators. I think China, as well as the United States, to a certain extent, the way where they have got it right is that there are a concentration of very good researchers in certain schools, right? So that kind of concentration is probably necessary. China has stopped down the policies that they had in the 1990s. They had a policy, they called them the C9. They wanted to have 9 universities in the top 100 on some parameters. They gave them a whole lot of funding, huge amounts of funding in the 1990s. So those universities, like Tsinghua being an example of them, they rose up in the rankings at some point in time. India is not it's not lacking in terms of the human capital, so there have always been spots of brilliance, and when you point out, when you talk about the 1970s or the 60s, there have been scientists in India who've done a lot of wonderful stuff, a lot of great work, but it's been spotty, so there'll be some person here, there will be some other person there. These are truly talented individuals who are doing a lot in different places. Institutionally, I think there are things that can be done there. Funding, I have other ideas, but I'm just going to stop at this. I'll let Rishi and later Shipra talk about. But Rishi, about talent, I think is something that you might want.
I would broadly agree with what Madan said, that as individuals we have many talented people, but over a decade ago I wrote a book called From Jugaad to Systematic Innovation: The Challenge for India. And that book, I really argued that the problem seems to be when you get all these individuals together and try to achieve something bigger than just what each individual can do. Point number 2, I just draw your attention to a movie many of you might have seen recently. It's called Oppenheimer. So if you just think back to Oppenheimer, that was in a way the transition point for research in the US. Because prior to the Second World War, even in the US, there was really no organized structure for supporting large research activities in academia. It is World War II and the entire Manhattan Project that established the possibility that large groups of scientists could really do amazing things in a short period of time. Before that, even in the US, they thought scientists were, some people who just lived in some, world of their own and didn't do things which were very useful. Now, I come from the government system. There is a very interesting document called General Financial Rules, GFR. If you study that document, you'll realize you can't do any large scientific project based on the GFR. So if you are trying to get government institutions to take on huge projects, it's simply not going to happen. So you need to think afresh. You need to, you don't even need to think out of the box. Even inside the box, you can think differently. And you just need to recraft some of those systems. The reason I say that finance is not the solution is because today, Let us say we actually had the money. We don't have the structures in place to absorb that money and actually create results. In fact, today, if you try and push money into the existing system, I don't think you'll have very good results. In fact, what you will have is you'll have a lot of disappointment, and then as a result, things will also get discredited.
I think, taking a step back and seeing what is the problem with our research as of now. So there's not one, there's not two, there are plentiful, right? And which is why we are where we are. Number one, historically, research has been kind of pigeonholed in terms of, publishing papers and at max filing patents. One typical example that we are still struggling with the problem of AQI in North India and particularly Delhi, and there have been talks about cloud seeding. Yes, IIT Kanpur has developed indigenous technology. Again, I give it that it's not kind of frontier research, all the countries have been doing it, but we have developed our indigenous technology which we can deploy. But again, there are so many kind of nebulous issues that keep coming up from the administration, from the various, government department sites, that solutions are not able to find their way, to application.
Before I begin this, or rather before I ask this question, I want to quote something that somebody in this room said, a very prominent voice when it comes to R&D in India. In July last year, co-founder of Infosys, Dr. Krishnan, asserted the need for spending, higher spending in R&D with more contribution from private companies. This is what he said. We need to invest more money in research. Research spending should hit 3% of India's GDP from 0.7% currently. Of this, private contribution should jump at least 1.5% from 0.1% at present. That's the contribution of industry in research, 0.1%. I leave this open to you all.
Very broadly, when you think about research that happens in educational institutions or outside of educational institutions, it's a spectrum from very basic research, what in America and all they refer to as discovery, right? So very basic research to development, right? So that's the spectrum, and we can always debate: am I doing basic research versus not? Am I doing development and so on? So a lot of what Shipra is talking about is more towards that that spectrum. It moves towards the development angle, which is very applied. You're taking real problems, you're trying to find solutions based on whatever the research that was done. And there, I think industry participation, it makes sense. Straight off the bat, they will want to participate. They can see the value in that. And the kind of changes that you need to bring about is to assure intellectual property, so you need to assure them that they will be able to use, if they've been funding the research, that they have they get some economic advantage of the use of whatever the funds that they've deployed. At the more basic end of research is what the economists they call the classic market failure, right? So that's the point at which you're developing what is fundamental foundational knowledge, which people cannot they cannot, the returns on that, it's not appropriate. They can't appropriate them. Any private person can't take them. This is a public, what people will call a public good, the development of a public good. And a lot of economically motivated actors, the question they'll ask is, why should I be funding that if it is going to if it is actually going to benefit everyone and not just me, right? So, and that's where the government is very necessary. So even in the United States, when you look at where the private sector is very much involved in funding a lot of research, even in universities, when it comes to basic discovery research, a bulk of the funding still comes from the National Science Foundation, the NIH, all the government, the federal government. Even there, it's the federal government that's the bulk of that research that comes there, and of course philanthropists. So and the reason is because philanthropists, when they're doing it, they're not giving with any strings attached. They're giving it because one is that they want to create a public good, that's there. But these are also with basic research, they're also long, they're moonshots to a large extent. It's very risky. The returns are not at all assured. So you need that funding, that kind of a model, you need that funding.
To some extent, the question of R&D is also related to the sectors you are playing in. Just take the Global Innovation Index report, which is produced every year by WIPO. There's a very interesting table there which talks about the top R&D spenders in each country. Interestingly, the top R&D spender in China spends about 10 times what the top R&D spender in India spends. The top R&D spender in China is Huawei, and the top R&D spender in India is, any guess? It's actually Tata Motors, partly due to JLR. But the ratio between the R&D spend of these two is almost 10:1. Why is that so? Well, it's also the nature of the industry. Tata Motors is, of course, a player primarily in transportation, which, of course, now there's EVs and hybrids and so on, but traditionally it's been not an industry where technology is moving very, very fast. But Huawei is in a sector where things are changing very fast, right? It's in telecom, electronics, ICT, all these kind of industries. India's number 2 and number 3, by the way, are in another industry where India is very focused, which is pharma.
I would like to bring two angles here. One is carrying forward to the sector-based R&D spend that Sir talked about. Again, that also shows the willingness both from the government side as well as industry side, a sense of urgency and what's in it for me. Right. Now, if you talk about energy transition, for instance, right? Solar has taken off so well. So for the past 20 years or so, right, solar has done massively well because there was a concerted effort from the government in terms of identifying, okay, what are the right incentives to put in place, what are the right business models to put in place, which will incentivize the industry to take it forward, right? Likewise, now the government is very keen on things like green hydrogen, right? So massive 20,000 crore worth of budget been set aside for green hydrogen, and I do see a lot of industry interest in coming and experimenting, even though we don't, it is kind of like a mini moonshot project right now, because we're still far away from meeting the commercial pricing target for it. Nonetheless, I see huge industry interest in experimenting with it. So again, it's the matter of prioritizing and acting with intent, both from the policy side as well as from the industry side, where they've made up their minds that this is the business model or this is the sector I want to play in. This is one. Second aspect I would like to bring to the core is we expect a lot from our researchers, right? Traditionally, we've created an environment where researchers, should be comfortable in their labs doing their research, completely disengaged from the outside world. And now, all of a sudden, we are expecting that just like in the US, they go about raising funds and, nurturing startups. This is not going to happen overnight. So we need to create mechanisms and systems that kind of allow first the transition of research, so tech transfer from researchers to startups who can then take it, or MSMEs who can then take it to the market, right? Now there are a few, so my office is based out of IIT Delhi, and I was talking about this to you earlier. You see a huge difference in the outcome when you look at the research products coming out of these centers of excellences versus coming out from the institute at large. So what these centers of excellences have done is, again, going back to my initial point earlier, brought about multidisciplinarity. So if you talk about EVs, for example, right, or new battery technology, rather than just relying on lithium, looking at more kind of abundant resources, sodium, etc., to create those batteries. That kind of EV revolution requires, electrical engineers working together with chemical engineers, working together with material scientists, working together to bring about that innovation, right? It's not just these engineers working together. It's also about, startups, entrepreneurs willing to come and take those products forward. It's about designers willing to come work with these guys and satisfy, create a product that is satisfactory to the industry, right? So unless you create those mechanisms, you can't expect that translation to happen overnight.
So I think what, again, and we are all probably saying the same thing, is that given the different kinds of research, let's first identify who the different actors in the system are, and then start thinking through what are the the solutions for these different actors. Of course, within a university system, there'll also be people who are doing other kinds of research. They'll take the research and they say, I want to commercialize this. There will be that, but not everyone in a university will do that. There are some who will do that. There are others who won't. There is always a great scientist like Albert Einstein who couldn't care a damn about commercializing anything that he was talking about, or like Edison, who was only thinking about commercializing all of what he was doing. Each great scientist in what they were doing, but these are very different kind of scientists. So we need to understand what the different parts of the system are and not attempt to do the same thing that is out there.
One is we have to create a culture of meritocracy, right? Whatever the measurement of that be, but it is very, very important to create that culture. Second is empowerment.